boy, it's hailing out here. Whew, okay, anyways, let's get some lights on. So, the weather's finally getting nicer here, and it's time to get the MR2 out of hibernation. So first things first, I always like to change the oil before I start driving it for the season. Get the old stuff just sitting in there, and I just like to start fresh. I like to start every year fresh. So yeah, we're working on the MR2 finally today, just as I promised. And it's clearly not a very nice day out here. Give you a little... Yeah, not great. So we're gonna hang out in the garage today. We're not going outside. Let's just stay nice and warm and dry in here. I gotta move the Harleys out of the way, and then I'm gonna wiggle the car over and just get a little bit more room because I gotta get at the drain plug from the passenger side, which is kind of close to the wall. So for starters, we're gonna see if this thing fires up. It's been sitting for a little while. Okay, so we got the car wiggled over into the center here, a little bit more space. Now, this is not going to be a tutorial video for how to change the oil on an MR2 or anything, because this car is a little bit different than a typical MR2. The most difficult problem with changing the oil on this car is this oil filter. And you can see the location of it that Toyota chose. This is already not real great to begin with. That's it right down there. So it's pointing up, which sucks because then if you've had it running, you take the oil filter off, it pours oil down the front of the engine. So that sucks on any MR2, but in this case you can see with my turbo kit, I have my wastegate and everything right there, right beside the oil filter. And the factory heat shield obviously doesn't fit with this turbo kit. I do have an aftermarket one here, but I'm not really sure how much that really does. I'm sure it helps, but it's not that great. So regardless, this oil filter really loves to bake onto this engine. And even if I put it on like the right torque where it's just barely tight enough, I find it still causes me trouble. So what I ended up doing, and over the years of changing the oil on this car, I've been through it many, many times now, I've learned that the idea is to warm the engine up all the way and then let it start cooling off a little bit so you're not burning your fingers. But you essentially have to do a heat cycle to loosen off the filter while the engine is cooling down. And so I did that and it didn't fight me, which is great. So car started up okay. It's always kind of a question, a car like this running on a standalone and stuff, after it's been sitting for a really long time all winter, and you never really know what you're in for, but this one is always a champ. She always fires right up for me. Oil filter is loosened off already. That's not going to fight me. Only other things worth mentioning is I'm not going to be able to film it really well because there's not much clearance under there, but I can basically just lay down beside the car and then reach in and grab the drain plug with one hand, and there's just enough room to get at it, but it's going to be tough to film that. Another thing worth noting is I'm running an aftermarket catch can on this car. I can't remember who made this one. It was one of those smaller companies, like a small fabrication company back in the forum days, and I can't remember the name, but by now they're either a really common bigger company or they've gone out of business. It seems like that's kind of how the MR2 community functions. But so I'm going to be emptying this one out. I usually empty it out like every other oil change just because it's a pretty good sized can, and I don't think it's necessary every single oil change, but I haven't done it for a while, so I'm going to empty out that catch can while the oil is draining. One more thing that makes changing the oil on this car a little bit different than a typical MR2 is what I'm running oil-wise. First of all, I like to use Toyota filters, which Anybody that watched my Tacoma oil change video already knows that, except nobody watched that video, so whatever. This is the oil that I run in this car, that I've always run. This is Valvoline VR1. This stuff has a really high zinc content and it's racing oil, but my main reason for running this is that it's essentially designed for really high temperatures. And this car gets hot, that's for sure. So being a mid-engine car, I think it's important to manage heat the best that I can. But so that's a little bit different. I don't think a typical MR2 is going to require 2050 VR1 racing oil, but that's what we're running. Well, as you can see, I remembered incorrectly, and it turns out my drain pan doesn't actually fit underneath this car at this ride height. So I ended up having to jack it up just off the subframe just to buy myself a little bit more space. So now I got my pan under there. Now I can crack the drain loose and we should be good to go from here. Well, that actually didn't take very long to drain at all, so just long enough for a juicy montage. But let's swap the filter out next, and then we'll get going on the catch can. All right, time to get this filter off now. Wasn't too bad. Anybody else love peeling the plastic off a new oil filter, or are you normal? Nice thing about these Toyota filters is I don't have to put any oil on this O-ring because they already come with a little bit of grease on there, so you can just take the plastic off and spin them right on. Of course, the idea here, especially on this car, is to not put that filter on too tight because I can tell you from experience that sucker's never going to come off if you put it on too tight. Alright, now I just got to pull this catch can off, which is pretty straightforward. It's just two bolts holding it in. There's one on the bottom and then one bracket on the back there. And then we'll just disconnect the lines off of the tank itself and pull that out. Alright, so we got the catch can drained, and speaking of draining, I'm just draining this battery here. So as you can see, typically the crankcase is going to connect right to this air intake. And you just saw all the oil that I poured out of that catch can. If this was going straight into that, all of that oil would have been going right directly into that turbo. And keep in mind, I haven't emptied that can out for a little while. It's been a good few oil changes, so it's accumulated over, I would say, maybe a couple of years even. But still, that's all oil that would have gone into that system. So that's why I run an oil catch can. And I think that's pretty good proof of how they're useful. Okay, so I'm just gonna set you guys up on a tripod. We're gonna put the catch can back in and we're gonna fill this old girl up with oil. And I guess we'll probably fire it up after then too. All right, well I got it all buttoned up now, filled it up with oil, and it calls for I think like 3.9 liters, and I just put a full 4 in, just because of like the bigger turbo lines and stuff like that. I could use a little bit extra oil. But I'm gonna fire it up and take a look at the dipstick, make sure it looks normal. But aside from that, I got nothing else to really share, so thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.